What you want to know. What you need to know. Talk 1470. WNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Welcome to the Caregiver Reality Show with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato, who bring you more than a combined 25 years of practical experience, helping thousands of family caregivers, helping them find solutions to the challenges and frustrations presented by this important responsibility. So if you are in the position of caring for a spouse or a parent, a loved one who is no longer able to care for themselves, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, let's tune in to today's edition of Caregiver Reality with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato.
Good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. This is the Caregiver Reality Hour. I'm your host, David Levy, and I'm here with my co-host, Paul Vadiato. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, everyone.
All right, you're listening to us on WWNN 1470 AM if you're in South Florida, iHeartRadio if you're anywhere in the world. If you're on your computer, it's probably caregiverreality.com. Click on live show, there we are, and AMP2 TV. So you have no excuse not to listen or watch. Anyway, Paul, I know it's been a tough week. We're not going to get into elaborate caregiving, but just because we've made it such an interesting part of the show, how was your week?
It was a very frustrating, troubling, worrisome week because just the nature of Debbie's lupus is such that a lot of things are happening at the same time. Confusion, a lot of doctors, a lot of tests. She's exhausted, and truthfully, I'm tired.
Okay.
How about Suzette?
Suzette's doing better. I mean, she's really getting around now after the knee surgery, and we've kind of gotten her back up on her other meds, her serotonin and the Wellbutrin, and so she's returning to the old Suzette. But, you know, just before the show, and it's not unusual, you were filling out a form.
Yes.
All right, because for long-term disability.
Yes.
And tell me what they asked. I don't mean the questions. First of all, how big was the form?
It was 6 pages, and it's, basic questionnaire of, who, what, where, and when.
Right.
But what they specifically ask is, what activities do you do? What activities are you not able to do? Every doctor that you've seen, including address, phone, fax, physical address, all of the medications, any of the procedures or surgeries that you've had, and anything that was different between 2 years ago and now. And what really...
Can you fit it all on the form?
You have to work real hard at it, but... we do this on a daily basis, and we're both professionals in doing it. I can't imagine how someone who
wasn't keeping a good record,
doesn't keep a good record, or just simply is slipping along the way and they can't remember. The easiest thing, and what I think they want, is just to forget to send it in, and that gives them an out.
Okay. Well, we're not going to castigate every insurance company
Absolutely
tonight,
not.
but certainly the forms and the post-inclusion after you've paid, where, one of the big insurance companies in town that does property insurance, when you have a claim, is now going back to see whether or not you forgot to put in that you co-signed a loan for your kid 6 years ago.
Wow.
And that's a reason for them not to pay, or at least to start a battle with you, all right, and which isn't fair. And one of the things I wanted to touch base on is I was speaking with the people from Medical Research Charities. They were very pleased last week. If you recall, we were featuring one of their constituent members. It was Scripps La Jolla on Alzheimer's. And today I was speaking with Larry Cummings, who's the CEO, and he said one of the most worthwhile, it may not fit directly into what you're doing in caregiving today, but is an organization called the Foundation for Fighting Blindness. And obviously as we age, our eyes change, cataracts, glaucoma, what we call macular degeneration and any one of a variety of things. Our eyes obviously are very, very important, and they're doing a lot of research at the Foundation for Fighting Blindness. They're a national vision research organization. They're at the forefront of research and development innovation, new treatments and cures, especially for inherited retinal degeneration diseases like wet and dry macular degeneration. That's as Dr. Speakers will get on it. And since its inception in 1971, they have raised more than $280 million for research continuously to fund all kinds of research around the world that has to do with eyes. And they have 5 essential treatment protocols in the area of genetics, gene therapy, cell-based therapy, nutrition and prosthetics, artificial eyes, and other kinds of equipment. And we know today that people with terrible vision are able to actually see with the aid of computer-generated images, and with Google glasses, who knows where all of that stuff is going to go. So they're a very worthwhile organization. So is medical research charities. You can see the good work that they do on medicalresearchcharities.org, and underneath it, just click on an organization that has a particular appeal to you because it's a disease that you want to help cure, or it's something to do with something that a member of your family has had, or you're worried about getting it.
For those that are just tuning in for the first time, David, just speak very briefly about what Medical Research Charities actually is and what they do.
They are an umbrella organization for a number, it's now 26, 27, it could be more than that, for organizations that do specific medical research in particular diseases and afflictions. And what they are geared to do is there is a protocol that has to happen in order for you to be able to go in and solicit federal employees when it's time for them to make a charitable donation, if they're inclined to. And they help these organizations go in, solicit, and give the federal employee one place to go to in medical research charities, and they can denominate which organization they want. They take care of the collection, all of the paperwork, etc., and they are very, very effective in helping. The only issue, and you raised it last week, is with a lot of the federal cutbacks, some of the employee pool isn't as big as it used to be, and especially tonight when I mention a few things later on about Alzheimer's that popped up out of the woodwork today, it's really important that the public, our listening public, be aware of 2 things. Number one, the research that should be coming, and especially I'll relate it to Alzheimer's right now, just isn't enough. We spend billions on heart disease and cancer. We spend hundreds of millions on Alzheimer's, and it really needs the economic punch and push from donations to get us to a point where we can get our arms around it, because every day there's a new aspect to it, and it's something that we're just going to have to continually deal with. But we can't just rely on the federal government. We all have to kind of remember these organizations and these disease afflictions so that we can help them, help everybody else.
And ultimately, it's going to come from these type of organizations, from the basic research, that the new medications, protocols will ultimately come. If you're personally involved, or you know of someone who's been suffering from such a disease, check out MRC and actually see what they're doing. They themselves are a not-for-profit,
Right.
and they do great work. And
you don't have to wait for the federal government.
No,
you can
you
make a
don't.
donation to them
Exactly.
right now and pick the organization, or go to the organization's website, which are available, obviously, when you go to the medicalresearchcharities.org website. And so, Paul, you were, and tonight, for our audience, I have a very special live guest, but I'm not going to tell you till after we take a break. But you'll find his subject matter very, very interesting, especially those of you who may be considering for yourself or a loved one getting involved with an assisted living facility, whether it's here in Florida or elsewhere. And so he'll be coming on very soon. Paul, you had an idea for a caregiver cookbook. What
did.
were you cooking up?
I did. Two things. This really was a difficult week in my caregiving. And one of the things I said, boy, I wish there was a cookbook and there was a recipe that deals with the situations and, more importantly, the feelings that are associated with them. And the other part of it was, so many of our listeners are doing just that, listening, and I think they need to be more active in our program and giving them an opportunity to express how they are feeling and some of the things that they're going with. So what I thought I would do would be talk about some of the ingredients that we would be using if we were going to create a caregiver cookbook.
Okay.
And
so you're now about to be Irma Rombauer.
Certainly not Rachel Ray.
All right.
But so talking about things like frustration, anger, guilt, remorse, abandonment, just to name a few, we're going to go over these over the next few weeks and talk a little bit about those feelings and how they might fit into the cookbook. We need your help listening out there for the input to create this virtual cookbook along the way. And I thought this week we'll talk a little bit about frustration, because I guess that's where I ended up in the cookbook
like
this week.
This week was frustration for you with a capital F.
So the question I had was, are you feeling frustrated with your caregiving this week? Not only did I have such a week, but I'm going to guess there are many out there who do feel frustrated, perhaps with the loved one that you're taking care of. I was frustrated with an insurance company this week, as I spoke a little bit earlier. Claims, doctors, and maybe the doctor is wonderful, but it's the staff within the office that is really creating the frustration.
Well, just remember that they may be having a frustrating day too. Just because they come to work in the doctor's office doesn't mean they're not a caregiver or that they haven't had a lousy day and a poor night's sleep.
No question about it, and we're not trying to cast
so this isn't
aspersions
staff
anywhere.
bashing.
Yeah, no, we're not. I certainly want to do that. You may be frustrated with the pharmacy, maybe some family members that are there that are giving you a hard time. It could be neighbors, but the frustration can come from many, many different sources and places, and sometimes it's a combination of multiple ones. So the question I'm asking is, how do you cope when you're feeling these frustrations out there?
To our audience, we're talking to you. I mean, we can certainly tell you how we do or don't cope, but the real essential question I think Paul is asking is, when you get frustrated as a caregiver, what do you do?
How do you handle that feeling that you have, that today, I'm just going to lose my mind if something doesn't change? Now, for me personally, I went outside, I did some manual labor in the yard.
It's about time.
I know it's about time. But it was a release from what I really had. When we talk about the coping skills, one of the things that you mentioned is try a different approach from what you're doing. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And try to understand a little bit, as you said, from the doctor's office, what their perspective may be. And I know you went through this not long ago with Suzette, when everything seemed to be crumbling and tumbling around you. You had to just sort of hold back and
right.
recognize.
And it doesn't make a difference how much you know. When it's you and you're the caregiver and the problem is hitting you smack in the face, you have just as much emotional involvement as any of my clients. It's very easy for us to see the people that we counsel to, all right? But when it's us, sometimes we lose perspective, and so almost like that stick of butter that goes into every, cake that you make, all right? I think that frustration is that first stick of butter.
Sure. Perhaps take it, just leave it alone. Take a walk for a little bit. Clear your head. When you're really frustrated with something that's going on and you just at that breaking point where you feel like you're going to lose your mind, just put it aside. I know I had to do that with a lot of this paperwork that I had, and just clear my head. Those are two of the ways. But how many of you out there find that when you feel this frustration, you begin to eat, and you begin to sort of substitute the frustration feelings that you have with, well, you know, maybe I have that bowl of ice cream. It's going to make the frustration go down a little bit. On a more serious vein, how many of you have an adult beverage as one means of dealing with that frustration?
So I've never heard it quite put that way, as an adult beverage. I like that.
Of your choice.
You kind of sanitized alcohol.
So if you're out there and you're feeling frustrated, give us a call, 1-800 565-1470, and tell us some of your coping strategies that you're dealing with, and also tell us what irks you the most in your caregiving, and why that is particularly troublesome to you.
Paul, I know why you had such a frustrating week and your failure to focus. Folks, that number is 1-888-565-1470. But you're forgiven.
Well, you know, that is my senior moment of the night.
Okay.
You know, and we know that there are many diseases, and all diseases have a caregiving. And you made reference to the adult beverage, but what certainly is not funny is the fact that addictions are a real problem that oftentimes is a sidebar to the caregiving that is going on when you start to feel those walls cave in on you. So, you know, is tough love versus giving into it.
And it's self-tough love.
Yes, self-tough love. Afraid to move forward. You're sort of frozen in time. Is that what you might be feeling at it? You know, what is the addiction? Can you even acknowledge that it exists? Or are we just going to pretend and put our heads in the sand and not actually deal with it? Because at the end of it, all disease have caregivers, and addiction is a disease, and you're going to feel the frustration. In our cookbook, frustration is probably going to be one of the ingredients that many of us are going to feel on many of those days.
It's the stick of butter.
It really is.
All right.
So if you want to share and you have some coping skills that you find particularly helpful, please reach out and give us a call, or on our website, www.caregiverreality.com. We would love to hear from you. You could find us on Facebook, and you can find us on LinkedIn.
You know, and a little tip that I have found over the years that works very well, especially with caregivers that are dealing with dementia and have loved ones that are constantly repeating themselves to the point where you're getting so frustrated that you can't repeat one more time that it's 7:15 or that we're going out for dinner at 8:30. I use something that I call the 3 Ds, which is defer, deflect, and distract. And so when I say defer, I mean, okay, Dad, yes, you know, whatever it may be. And then you take a look at a picture and say, isn't that a great picture of your grandmother?
Right.
All right. And then totally distract the conversation with, you know, I had a great day today. I was out and did this and that. And you'll find that if you defer, distract, and then deflect it away to where you want to be, it makes it a lot easier. And as opposed to fighting with the disease, because mom or dad or grandma or your spouse would not be repeating themselves if they had a way to stop it.
Sure.
All right. And one of the issues of short-term memory is, and the issues that they do have, is not only can't they remember that they asked the question just a matter of a few seconds earlier, but when you answered it, they can't retain the answer. And so the thing that keeps playing on their internal clock, so to speak, is what time, where are we going, and it's not that they're trying, and you can't turn around like many people try and do. As you know, I have a daughter with a hearing problem, and I can't tell you how many times when she was growing up that people would stop and speak loud and move their lips like this, and she used to tell me, it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I'm used to reading somebody's lips who's talking normally, and when they go ahead and make it exaggerated, it's very hard to follow them. And by the same token, not quite the same thing, but speaking loudly and saying, look, how many times do I have to tell you? Because the true answer is you couldn't calculate the number of times that you would have to repeat it. So your best bet is to defer, deflect, and then totally distract.
Yeah. Well, you also have to be careful when you feel that frustration that you don't let the toothpaste out of the tube, so to speak, because when you feel frustrated, you tend to say things that you might not normally say. In cases perhaps when there's not dementia or Alzheimer's, spousal caregiving or with a child.
Do you yell at your wife?
Yeah, exactly.
No.
And you know, Debbie sort of picked up the vibe, and she said, "Are you frustrated with me?" And I had to stop and think, and I said, "You know, honey, I'm not frustrated with you. I'm frustrated with the disease
And the situation. Sure. Anyway, I think it's time for us to go to a break. When we come back, I have a very interesting guest, and I'll introduce him right after the break.
Chances are you or someone you know has age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. Millions are losing their sight to AMD, and I'm one of them. Getting that diagnosis was terrifying. Thankfully, my doctor caught it early, and I was able to receive a treatment that's helped me keep enough vision to continue reading and doing what I love. Not everyone is so lucky. That's why you should visit your eye doctor and learn the warning signs. The Foundation Fighting Blindness provides free AMD information kits with everything you need to know about preventing and managing the disease. Call 1-800-529-2004 to request your kit today. Anyone can get AMD, but you don't have to be a victim. Knowledge is power. So whether you or a loved one has AMD, or you just want to learn more, the Foundation Fighting Blindness can help. That number again is 1-800-529-2004. Don't wait. Call today.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at david@caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one. This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with them on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
And we're back, just like the rejoinder promised there. And I have with us our guest tonight. His name is Jeff Van Treese. He's an attorney locally here. He's got a practice down in Fort Lauderdale. And he's a civil litigator. He handles things like intellectual property, which is the things that you own or that you've developed that are yours. And some other people may want to take it away, but intellectual property is yours. And somebody has to defend you, and Jeff is there to do it. More importantly, he's been of late moving towards things in the elder world, or the elder law section of the bar, and he wrote an article, and he's involved in litigation that involves assisted living facilities and that 72-page contract that you get involved with when you go to sign up, no matter where you are. And we've talked about, the fact that it's really a gigantic real estate lease, but one of the things that I've always said is make sure that you don't get trapped financially. So sign in your representative capacity as durable attorney, power of attorney, or attorney in fact. But Jeff has some interesting information to relate to us. And Jeff, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And why don't you give us a quick overview of what the case or this piece of litigation is about and what you've discovered as a result of researching it?
Well, one of the things that I've done some cases on and done some research on are these enigmas that are called that are responsible party agreements, otherwise known as guarantee agreements, where what happens is a caregiver will sign an assisted living facility contract, and there will be language in that contract. As you mentioned, it can be 70 pages plus, and that contract will have language in there that says the caregiver is a financial guarantor of the resident, which means that that caregiver can be sued for any bills that are not paid that are associated with that resident's stay in the assisted living facility.
Well, I know some states have something called filial responsibility, where the children are responsible, typically in nursing home and for Medicaid debt.
Right.
So if the caregiver signs on behalf of the resident in their representative capacity, does that clause in the, let's say, assisted living contract unhook their representative capacity, or do they still have protection?
Well, that's a very interesting area, because I have actually come across contracts that there's language in the contract that says that if you are signing as a representative of the resident, you are liable for the resident's debts that
Wow.
could possibly be owed. Now, I have very serious questions as to whether such a agreement would even be enforceable. If this were to go before one of the District Court of Appeals in Florida, I'd be very interested in seeing how they would come down. Unfortunately, no such case has made it up to any of those courts, and we really can't say for sure what would happen and whether these agreements would even be enforceable, but they are being used.
Right. Well, you know, one of the things that always perplexes me, and I mention it often, you go to sign a 2-page lease or a 3-page real estate contract, and written on the bottom of it, it always says, if you don't understand this, get professional help, seek a lawyer. We get to assisted living facility contracts, and they are many times in the 70-plus pages with other exhibits, and nowhere does it say, if you don't understand this or if you're not sure, you know, there's no warning on it. And people presume what it is that they're getting based upon what the salesperson who's showing them the facility wants them to see. I'm not saying they're duplicitous or that it's fraud, but you know, you get to see the nice shiny this, and you know, the staff that looks like they're owned by the facility but they're really just subcontractors and things like that. What do you do when you get a 72-page document and I come to you as Jeff Van Triest attorney and you find a clause like that? What would you do to change that, or how would you handle that if I were your client?
Well, what I would suggest doing would be either yourself or your attorney to sit down with the assisted living director and have a conversation about that language and say that you are not comfortable with that language being contained within that agreement, within that contract. And if the director agrees, what you would try to do is scratch out that language to have it eliminated.
Right.
And initial it. It's very important that both your initials and the initials of the director be next to that language that's scratched out, which will signify that that language is being eliminated from the contract. So that's what I would suggest doing. In the event that the director refuses to admit the resident without a financial guarantor, then I would very seriously recommend looking elsewhere, looking at other facilities.
What is the likelihood, do you think, that they will change these standard contracts, you know, should you bring it to their attention?
It just depends on the director, how much discretion he has, the relationship between the director and upper management. It's just going to vary very much on a case-by-case basis. What I can say is that these agreements are essentially prohibited in nursing homes. In other words, if you go to a nursing home since 1987, a nursing home cannot, as part of the Nursing Home Reform Act, a nursing home cannot require a third-party guarantor. So that's because they receive Medicare and Medicaid, and they cannot require it. But since assisted living does not, for the most part, receive Medicare and Medicaid with some exceptions.
Right. Diversion.
The diversion program, exactly. They're not governed
under that same
by the Nursing Home Reform Act, and so there's really no regulation that stops this. There's no law or regulation that stops this practice, unfortunately.
And it's not labeled within the contract guarantor. I mean, it's just there, and
buried in the language.
You have to find it.
Buried in the language. In fact, I've seen it in the middle of a 70-page contract, 60-page contract, whatever the case may be, buried, and in fact, the heading where the language is contained may not even say guarantor on it, just says payment, and then it's buried within that paragraph.
Wow.
So you really have to be very astute, and it's one more thing that and we talk about it all the time, it's in my book, and one of the things that I always talk about is if you don't know how to buy an assisted living facility, if it's not like checking into a hotel, all right? And if you don't understand it, don't let your ego get in the way, or your eagerness to place mom or dad or yourself without understanding what it is that you contractually have obligated yourself to. Because once you sign on the dotted line, you have signed on the dotted line. For the moment, that particular provision, and many of these documents contain that, hasn't been litigated, but I'm not so sure that you want to be the first plaintiff, all right, who's going to have to go to their pocket and take out a good chunk of change in order to prove yourself right, or to make the provision that is contained therein illegal. And one of the things that I do think we have to make a distinction with is that when you get Medicaid funds, such as being in a nursing home under Medicaid, and if you pass and your estate has money in it, Medicaid, as opposed to Medicare, is a loan, and they will come back and seek from your estate payment. And so I have heard many stories in my years of doing this where somebody has passed away, Medicaid sent their little notice and says, and by the way, you owe us $148,762.87. Please remit in the little green envelope. And people go, what? And so one of the things that you need to understand is that when you do seek the relief and the help from Medicaid, and Jeff, I'm sure your knowledge moving into the elder law world is that you have to make darn sure that whatever assets you have, not only did you need to do that if you had any to qualify for Medicaid, but that you make sure that you don't leave anything in your estate that can be attached or imposed upon by the federal government as a reimbursement.
Yeah, that's really important to make sure that, and that may be dealt with at the qualifying level. Just to qualify, you have to move those assets out, as well as any money that you have in order to qualify for Medicaid.
But knowing that the community spouse, or the one who isn't going in, can keep the house, and if the community spouse predeceases, and ultimately if the spouse that's in on Medicaid dies and the house falls into the estate because it wasn't done under a ladybird deed, or which, folks, you don't have to worry about, but essentially what it does is it creates a life estate in the person who still owns the house and goes directly to the beneficiaries. That's something that you would discuss with an elder law attorney or a really competent real estate attorney, so that that house doesn't become an asset that Uncle Sam can get a hold of when the person on Medicaid passes away.
Jeff, typically if someone is having their loved one move into an assisted living and they do want to have a contract like that reviewed, what would be a typical fee that an attorney would charge to review that contract and so advise?
That would vary depending on the attorney, but it would, most attorneys, they can charge, anywhere from $150 up to $300 an hour. And so that can be costly. However, it may very well be worth it because you could end up being sued for $5,000 to $10,000. So if it was 1 hour of their time, it may save you a huge multiple of that.
And not only that, but I'm sure as part of putting your article together, and why don't you tell folks where they can find that article besides on possibly your professional website. It was written to go where?
It was written as a peer-reviewed article with the Elder Law Advocate, which is written essentially for Florida's elder law attorneys. Mm-hmm. That can be that's generally circulated amongst members of the Florida Bar and can be seen on the members page of the Elder Law website.
Right. You were good enough to send it to me. I found it's not that long, folks. It's about 3 pages or so. And do you have it posted on your professional website?
It's going to be published in the July edition. I'll probably be posting it around that time.
All right. And what is your website?
The website is Oltman Patent, OLTMAN patent.com, and so would plan on posting it there in the near future.
It's a fascinating read. And one of the things, if you're going to take a document of that size, and you ought to, because when we sign things like assisted living and signing somebody in for a nursing home, there's a lot of emotion and a lot of drama, and you can't wait to kind of get it over with and get on with what it is that you imagine or have been promised is going to happen. And I would assume not only is this guarantor language something that can be very problematic, but I'm sure there are other things inside of that 72-page document that if you were really aware of it, you might bring it to light when you were discussing it with the director. Would that be a safe assumption?
Yeah, especially as it relates to things like the deposit, which oftentimes what will happen is if the resident passes, they will you may not get, if you put down a deposit, you may not get the whole thing back. They may deduct some portion of that for painting the room or doing something they really shouldn't be doing because they're not supposed to charge you for ordinary wear and tear. But I've seen where they've taken hundreds of dollars off your deposit just for upkeep, general upkeep.
So if you've got a deposit, you want to make sure that it says this deposit, all right, is not to be used as an offset for any normal wear and tear to the room or the things that my loved one may be using that aren't in the normal course of events.
That would be good. They're not supposed to charge for wear and tear anyway, but it's just better to have it in there. I might even jot it down on the contract that's the case. Best case scenario, you wouldn't have to have a huge deposit put down, but a lot of facilities will require that. So that's an issue that can come up. And the other thing is that in many circumstances, the caregiver is going to have so many other things on their mind when this stuff is happening, both when the person, their loved one, is going into the facility and then after they pass. So that's when they hit you. That's when they hit you with the contract when they go in, and that's when they hit you with things like the deposit when they pass. And that's why communication and planning in advance is really so important.
And there's always somebody waiting to take the room.
Yes.
So
Right.
you need to sign today while you're here.
Right.
Yes. Or there's a promotion going on.
Yeah.
Exactly. Special deal today.
I do have a question for you, Jeff. I mean,
Yes.
since our listening audience is literally the world, and I know you're a Florida attorney, while you were doing this research, is this something that you've seen as common practices across the United States, or?
Generally, yes. That's, for the most part, regulation of assisted living, and I should say home health care as well. Home health care, this problem arises with responsible party agreements. This is commonplace throughout the United States, unfortunately.
And I would assume, except for certain statutory language of which there's very little for assisted living, most of these assisted living facilities, except for smaller ones like board and care, which are inside a private home where one bed may be denominated as a Medicaid bed, they're owned by very large chains, and I would assume that but for any particular aspect within a state, they're pretty uniform in terms of what corporate expects the director to put in front of a potential client. So.
Oh yes, this is true. That we have national chains. We've seen a lot of large national chains buy up some of the more local assisted living,
mom and pops.
the mom and pops, and we've just seen them get very, very large. And with the size of the assisted living chains comes a great deal of negotiating leverage, and the caregiver is generally going to be on the wrong end of that leverage.
Right. Not only is I have a waiting list, but as the director, I can only tell you. I can imagine a conversation. I'll have to take, this isn't like running into your sales manager to see if you can knock an extra $20 off, or $200 off the car deal. This has got to go up the food chain, and you're sitting there with all of the angst, and you say, you know what, I'll worry about it when it happens. And so it's not that you get bullied into doing it, but when you realize the delay and that you're not going to get done today what you expected, it may just change your attitude about what you need to do. So one of the things, folks, and sometimes it's hard to do, sometimes you don't even get to see that contract until you're ready to sit down and they put it in front of you. And asking for a copy in advance in order to take it to your attorney, you may see a few directors turn a little bit green because they don't want that document out there being reviewed by somebody who really understands the law and is going to pore through it very carefully on behalf of their client. So, word to the wise. And there's the Latins were very common to say, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. And Jeff, I want to thank you. You're welcome to sit here if anybody calls in. We're at 888-565-1470. So please, if you'd like to ask Jeff a question, if you want to ask Irma Rombauer Vadiato a little bit about his cookbook, or you have a question for me. Last week, right before we were through, it was a very interesting phone call from a woman who obviously was listening to the show and was dealing with a neighbor next door that was having a very difficult issue in falling, and the response she was getting from both Medicaid and the home health care company. And I must tell you that you have to be on top of these issues. Otherwise, just as you said, Jeffrey, it's a combination of the assisted living is a very unregulated world. And for a great part, so is home health care. You may find that the person that's going in the door, has a little bit of licensure or training, and the owners themselves may have to get registered, etc. But there isn't a lot. When you're calling up and you say, I need somebody because mom can't take one more day unless I get some help in the house, and somebody shows up, and I know a lot of good agencies, but I know an awful lot of agencies where I've heard some pretty horrendous stories. Once again, you're letting somebody into your home on the say-so of the organization, and if you haven't checked them out, and one of the most important questions that you can ask a home health care agency is, are these your employees? Or are you getting them from a registry? Are you getting them because you made a phone call and they're out there on a list and you brought them in? And that's a real important thing. I would like to know that the people that are coming in my house at least have a responsibility with the agency as an employee. And so a word to the wise, if you don't know what you're buying, if you don't understand the rules, if you're just acting out of emotion, get help. All right. I see we have a caller on the phone. Caller, welcome. Caller.
Yes.
Oh, good evening.
Good evening.
All right. Could you speak up just a little?
Yes, I am just wondering, how could we get a hold of Mr. Jeff Dantrice to represent us?
I will give you the opportunity to have him tell you how to get in touch with him.
Oh.
Jeff?
Hello. This is Jeff. My You can contact me by email or by telephone. You can email me at jvt, then the number 2, law @gmail.com.
That's J. Johnson Victor Tony 2 at
law,
law.
LAW, at gmail.com.
And your phone number at work?
My phone number is 561-789-6866.
Repeat that, please.
That's 561 area code 789-6866.
And we'll put that on caregiverreality.com.
So that if anybody didn't have the opportunity to jot it down, if you're driving, we'll be happy to do that. Caller, did you have any other questions?
No, that's very good. What has been said today is very informational, detailed, getting down right on top of it, and I really enjoyed watching this.
Well, thank you very much. We're trying to provide a service as well as to try and be entertaining, and I want to thank you. And please go ahead and make sure you get a hold of Jeff so you get good representation on your way to putting somebody in an assisted living facility if that's what you're doing.
Absolutely, I am, and thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you so much.
All right, see, somebody is listening.
That's a good thing.
Anyway, and any of you out there, as I said, we'll have that information on the website so that you'll be able to reach Jeff in case you didn't catch the number. Oh, talking to the mic. I'm sorry. I apologize. I wanted to make mention of a couple of things. There were some articles out this week, and while the laws are changing in terms of how much one can read, all right, without permission, and I'm not going to, but there is a lot more Alzheimer's being diagnosed at 45, 50, and under the age of 60. And these are people that are still working, that still have kids, and the employer and friends just cannot believe. You know, you hear you got a whole third age and in the middle of your work cycle, and all of a sudden you're being diagnosed with having some form of dementia, and Alzheimer's being the most common. And there was an article in the USA Today, which was published day before yesterday, and I read it, and essentially they were describing the plight of a 49-year-old nurse who came down with dementia, couldn't work, forgot to pick up her grandchildren, and on with the story of forgetfulness. She thought it was stress. She saw one of the doctors at work, and he diagnosed her with dementia of the Alzheimer's type. She couldn't keep working. Eventually, and they followed her for a while, she had to go bankrupt. She's homeless, and all because she got dementia at a very bad time in life. There's no good time to get it, but she hadn't had the opportunity to put away the dollars or to have the resources to have dementia at 49 with every possibility of making it to 69, 79, or 89, totally dependent on others or facilities to care for you. She's too young for Medicaid. She might wind up getting Social Security disability, but her outlook is very bleak, and the USA article made that point. And they also went on to talk about, could you still keep working? And I guess, you know, they made a couple of examples. One was an accountant. Well, maybe with a little bit of help, he could keep working. But if you're a doctor, and they were talking about a doctor, obviously he can't keep practicing, but the doctor did go ahead, similar to our friend Dr. Hilfiker, who I went and checked on the other day, and if we have time I'll mention it, but the doctor went on to teach until he could no longer teach because he couldn't take the responsibility of treating patients.
David, this really goes back to a point that we've been making for so long. You need to have a plan.
Oh, gosh, you need to have a plan.
You know, we talk about dementia and Alzheimer's, and it's almost like a stimulus response. We think about the elderly, and it actually is affecting more and more people at a younger age. If that were to happen, what would be the plan? Who would be the caregiver? Where would the dollars come from? What are the dollars going to cost? These are the type of things that we really don't want to talk about, but it's absolutely essential that we have a plan together, we have the people, we have the legal documents, we have an indication of what that would look like.
And especially when it comes to dementias, where, unfortunately, you have a heart attack or you get cancer, and believe me, both of those are devastating illnesses, but you still have your wits about you to be part of what you want, how you want to do it. You get dementia, and it advances, even at a young age, at a fairly rapid pace, and the younger you are, it seems the quicker it moves. You have to make sure that you do have a plan and that people understand what you want. And it's more than just advanced directives of what you want when you can't speak medically, or durable power of attorney that allows somebody to step in and make arrangements for you. But God forbid that that happens. What do you really want? Where do you want to be? And many people would say, I want to be home. Is that even possible? You need to take a good hard look at what home looks like today and what you think home looks like a few years from now, and say, is it feasible for me to stay home? Who's still going to be in the house? Can my husband handle this and go to work? If not, what plans can I possibly make? Usually once you're diagnosed, it's too late to try and get long-term care, and that's getting more expensive by the day, but still very effective as a policy. But you need to let people know what you want and not just leave it up to other folks to figure out what to do when you're no longer cognitively competent to make decisions for yourself.
David, while I was still in practice not that long ago, one of the things that I used to ask clients is that if the phone were to ring tomorrow and it was the Almighty on the line and said, heads up, 6 months from tomorrow, you're going to come down with, mention the disease, of worse being Alzheimer's, and it's now tomorrow, what do you begin to do?
Well, the first thing you have to do, and and not as a lead into having a discussion this way, but the book on what do you do about practical problem solving for non-clinical caregiving, and let's face it, there's very little that you can do clinically if the Almighty has told you 6 months from now you're getting dementia, because you're a day late and many dollars short, and I'm not even sure that the healthcare industry has a lot on its plate to help you, other than trying to stay healthy. But you need to, just as we have done here in the questionnaire that's inside of the book, is you need to take a vigorous look at what you have, what you don't have, what you need to do, and certainly those documents that I mentioned are going to allow others to help guide the ship. But can you stay at home? What other assets do you own? Should they be liquidated now and not under stress so that you have a pot of dollars? Would this be a good time to look around? And let's say you're living in Boca Raton and it's extremely expensive, as it is in some other states, to get into an assisted living, memory care, or another kind of facility. Should you move further away, even though the family may not be around, in order to get into an affordable facility? And these are things that only you can figure out. And if I had somebody that told me, that made that phone call, and it was the Almighty saying, you got 6 months, I would be a very busy person, not just from a bucket list perspective, because if you didn't say I'm dying on that 6th month anniversary, then I'm going to figure out exactly what it is I want and what it is that I have, so I can let other people know, my family, my loved ones, my significant other, whatever it may be.
And it's also looking beyond the obvious step. And I remember a situation where we had one of our clients who was trying to decide whom to name in their advance directives for health care. And she was talking about her 3 sons, and she was saying with a smile on her face, I trust them, they love me, they're always going to do the right thing. The question that I then followed up with, tell me about your daughter-in-laws. And the smile quickly left the face. And a word was used that I'm not going to repeat on the air, but
right, thank you.
But we know that was less complimentary. So obviously, what I had said to her was, well, they sleep together every night. They have conversations about what's going on. I think that person may have a lot of influence on your son.
Who's not the same person that you raised and left the house at 18 to go to college and law school and got married.
So it's really thinking things through. Who do you want? Who especially do you not want? And what is going to be the effect of those people in their lives who may affect the decision making that they have? Right. This is about you. This is about your decisions, and you have to give it a lot of thought. And the nice thing about doing the estate planning and creating these documents is you always have the opportunity to go back and rethink it, as long as you still have a few marbles rolling around in the head, and you can fog a mirror. You have the ability going back to the attorney and to rethink those issues. But these are so important.
Right. I would say to Jeff, I think that in trying to determine capacity or competence, you'd have to move it a few notches back from just fogging a mirror.
Right.
But these are very important things. We talk about it all the time, and the reason we talk about it is because it's just that important. And if you haven't made a part of your life plan, if you're just living day to day assuming that you're going to remain infallible, and all around you you see friends and others that are assuming the role of caregiver, that are getting sick with illnesses that you never thought you'd get when you were 25 or 30 or 35, that science still has not beaten. And that's why things like medical research charities are so important. We got to keep the research going. But you need to take your life in hand and say, what do I want if I can't call my shots? And it's not just elders with dementia. It's everybody over the age of their majority in whatever state they are. Mom and dad can't call the shots for you. If you're 22 years old and something happens and you're away at college and decisions have to be made, and you call up and you say, I'm mommy, and they go, so what? The HIPAA laws don't let me tell you anything. I'm sorry you're mommy. I'll let you know what hospital he's in and that he was in a bad accident. But you can't guide that ship. And so you can't forget that accidents, illness happen at any age. Caregiving has no respect for age, relationship, the condition.
A plan.
Have a plan. We got about a minute and a half left. Jeffrey, I want to thank you so much for being on. Why don't you just repeat your office number again one more time for those that are listening?
Oh, thank you so much. My number is 561-789-6866, and you can also reach me at my email, jvt2law@gmail.com.
And we're getting near the end, and I would like to thank Jeffrey, and I would also like to thank that audience out there and our caller. I hope you get very good service from Jeff. I'm sure that you will. And so, South Florida, America, and the world, thank you for listening. We'll be here next week. Paul?
Have a great week in caregiving, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver reality show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com, or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff,